This capital city has seen its share of victories and defeats, but no greater shock and sadness than on November 22nd, 1963. Tonight, live from Washington, D.C., we look back on a day that shook us like no other before or since. Everybody has a story about that day. Where were you?
I was in 6th grade in Princeton, New Jersey.
I was in geometry class.
I was the star of Funny Girl.
I was in my warehouse.
I was on an airplane headed for Kansas City.
It was a beautiful day. And I heard somebody have a radio to his ear.
A classmate said, "Did you hear the news?" And I said, "No, what?"
Now turning on to Elm Street.
We interrupt this program.
There's a report that the president's been shot.
Something has happened in the motorcade route. Stand by, please.
And the world stopped.
November 22nd, 1963. Where were you? A Larry King TNT special live from Washington with very special live guests. Exclusive recollections from presidents, stars, and world leaders, plus your phone calls. Now, ladies and gentlemen, Larry King.
Good evening. We will be including your phone calls tonight with your own remembrances. Our numbers will be flashing on the screen. We have two of them. East of the Mississippi is 1-800-879-2166, and west of the Mississippi is 1-800-879-3166. We thank you for joining us. We're going to reflect together tonight on how America has changed since 1963. But to understand what a long, strange trip it's been, you have to recall how things used to be. So we're going to start by looking back. Watch.
I'm gonna sing my song, twist along with me.
Everything seemed easier, less overwhelming. Choices were simple. Ford or Chevy, Coke or Pepsi, NBC or CBS, democracy or communism. Choices like that we could handle. And we knew who was number one, too.
We were all children of the 50s. That was a very secure and peaceful time, at least as we felt growing up in the suburbs. And we were just all stunned that it could happen to us.
When President Kennedy was assassinated until 1970, I lived in a whole world of darkness. There was nothing to see. There was nothing. And then after that, then all these other guys got killed and got shot. And, you know, Martin Luther King. 60s, forget it. I don't. It was the most exciting and the most turbulent and most happiest and unhappiest times that I can remember. And when I think back on the 60s, it makes me want to cry, you know, because we had so much.
On November 22nd, 1963, Peter, Paul, and Mary happened to be driving to Dallas.
It was a beautiful day, sunny and that kind of nice Texas weather. The radio was playing, and the news came in, and there was this sense of chaos from the reporters.
Dallas, November 22nd. President John F. Kennedy was shot and killed here today, period.
I was a senior in high school in Hot Springs, Arkansas. Stage 5, Paramount Studios. We were doing Nutty Professor.
At that time, I was in Moscow, in my father's residence.
I was shooting one of those two bombs. It was either, I've forgotten, but it was Under the Yum Yum Tree or Good Neighbor Sam. They were back to back.
I was having lunch at the Hilton Hotel in Trader Vic's in Chicago on Wacker Drive.
It is the terrible thread that ties us all together. Movie star or president, famous or not, none of us were spared, and we all know where we were.
I've never seen or even heard of it being continuous. Not as a result of a single blast, but an event which created that kind of continuous shock in the minds and hearts of literally millions of people. And it wasn't just Washington or the United States. This shock was felt all around the world.
Total shock, utter, people were stunned. And also, an assassination, it wasn't a heart attack or a stroke, or an assassination. And I'd been to see the spot, and It's still inexplicable.
What really died that day? What happened to us?
I went out in the back, sat on the steps and cried. And have never gotten over it.
The two of us stood there and cried together. I'll never forget it.
We had a wild, wild poker game, and every time I was not playing with the cards, and I had my head in my hand, and I was crying.
I cried. It was an amazing feeling of intimacy, like you really knew somebody. And then we got together in sort of groups, just in groups, and sort of held hands and kind of held each other and felt the loss.
It was not to be the last loss either. Bobby, King, Vietnam, Watergate, Squeaky Fromme, Lennon, Hinckley, Beirut, Iran-Contra. Why does it sometimes feel like nothing could stop us before 1963, and nothing's gone right since?
I think that we felt as if something was rolling over us and we were powerless to stop it.
Nobody could understand how this had happened, why it had happened, or what it meant. Truthfully, there's a huge, huge number of people who still don't understand, and I'm one of them.
What about you? Where were you? If you've got a story, call 1-800-879-2166 east of the Mississippi, 1-800-879-3166 in the west. Look back on the day that tore us apart, but still pulls us together. 30 years ago, he was host of the Today Show on NBC. He has been in the forefront of American television for 4 decades. He has logged more hours on camera than any person ever. Ladies and gentlemen, the co-host of ABC's 2020, Hugh Downs.
Larry, good to see you.
Thank you for coming.
Pleasure to be here.
Where were you?
I was at NBC. I had just come home from, I had gone to lunch, and I came back to the office, stopped off at the newsroom, and I was about 50 feet from the newsroom door when a young man came out running, carrying a big, long piece of paper. And I said something inane like, where's the fire? And he said, as he went past me, he said, they shot Kennedy. And my first feeling, many people may feel this way, my first feeling was it was a bad taste joke. You know, it didn't make sense. Before I got to the door, Bill McAndrew, who was the head of NBC News at the time, came out and in a loud voice said, I want all programming canceled. He had the power to do that, and it was for the rest of the weekend. And of course, most of us thought when we heard he had been shot that the hope was he'd been shot and wounded and would recover. And the real shock came in when the increasing bad news came from Parkland.
Had you hosted a Today Show that morning?
Yes. Yes.
Was there references during that show to how well he had done in the night before in Fort Worth? And
yes, surely. That was in the news. And it was all routine, of course. And the Today Show, as a result, was on for the first time, and only time as far as I know, 7 days a week, because we, and for many hours, stayed on Saturday and Sunday.
So you didn't leave the NBC studios then?
Well, no, we went to Washington. We went to Washington on Saturday. I think did the program Saturday and then went to Washington Sunday, and we stayed through the funeral and broadcast.
From a broadcasting standpoint, how tough was it?
It was, maybe tough isn't the right word, because there was so much adrenaline. It was tough as the grief set in, because you realized something really terrible had happened to the nation. Otherwise, from a broadcasting standpoint, I don't think it was as tough as some situations I've been in.
Are you first a professional then? In other words, did you know John Kennedy?
Yes, I knew him, not well, but I had met him. I had met him before he was president and once afterward.
Isn't it hard, though, when you're presenting a drama about which has also affected you? It would seem to me the hardest part of journalism.
That is different. You're not detached from it.
That's right. This is not some things. Objective, detached journalism.
That's very true, and that was true of many broadcasters. I think were moved enough that it made, in that sense, it made broadcasting tougher. You're right. That was a tough thing.
Where were you in the Oswald shooting?
where was I? When Oswald was shot, I was watching on a home set, and I saw that, and I couldn't help thinking at the time that's probably the first time in all of television that a human being was shot and killed live on television.
Now, you've been in television so long, as we said, logged more hours than anybody. What did that day do to this medium?
Oh, I think it kind of grew up in a hurry, because you remember, you look back now at some of the archival stuff, and people were on the phone, things that we now would have the machinery to cover from many different angles. Was all done in rather primitive, relatively primitive form. It was done very competently. I must say the audience was kept up to date on what was happening minute by minute, but visually it wasn't what television has become.
There were no satellites, so
that's right.
We saw people on phones talking to people.
And coaxial cables were what was working it. But I think the people working in it did a marvelous job, but the technology wasn't there yet.
There now.
It sure is.
That story would be covered now from every aspect.
And you know, actually, the actual shot that killed him, the Zapruder film, would now be many, many camcorders, home video things.
Hugh Downs is with us. The craft of reporting the news has changed dramatically since 1963, and many look back on that date, November 22nd, as a crucial turning point for the profession, especially those of us in television. Watch.
Well, I was in the newsroom at CBS, the CBS Evening News room, and it all happened right there.
A lot of New York journalists were at lunch at midday, November 22nd, but the anchor of the CBS Evening News preferred to eat at his desk. He heard the bells on the UPI machine and saw the word that galvanizes every reporter: flash.
When it came over the wire, we immediately shouted that we had to take air, take air. Unfortunately, we didn't have a camera hot that could record it, or in the studio. It wasn't a studio, it was a newsroom into which they brought the cameras every evening. And so there weren't any cameras immediately available. So we went into the announce booth and interrupted a soap opera that was on the air and did voiceover on the soap operas.
The first reports say that President Kennedy has been seriously wounded by this shooting. He was wounded in an automobile driving from Dallas Airport into Dallas.
By the time Cronkite got a camera, the shockwave was spreading all over the world. This was brand new. When Lincoln was killed, the news took days to get around. FDR's death came over the radio, but Kennedy was on television. This time, for the first time, we could see it happen.
Died at approximately 1 o'clock Central Standard Time, which is about 35 minutes ago.
After being shot at.
After being shot.
I don't really think there's been an occasion like that upon the death of anybody, ever. Because even when Napoleon Bonaparte died, or I don't care, Henry VIII died, or you name it, the Kaiser died, it only affected a small proportion of the total population of the world. But when Kennedy died, bango, it was all over South America, all over Asia, into Africa, out in the Pacific Islands.
I was the Berlin bureau chief. It was a terrible day in Berlin, low clouds all over it. And when the news came across the ticker that the president had died...
Dinner hour, right?
About then in Berlin, there was a huge thunderclap outside the window. It was weather, but the women who worked in our bureau thought World War III had begun.
I was in Saigon. I remember it so clearly. I was sharing a house with the great AP photographer, Horst Voss, who later went on to win the Pulitzer Prize twice. And he had gotten up very early to go out on a mission. He came back, he woke me up and said, "They shoot Kennedy, they shoot Kennedy." We got up, we went over, I guess, to the USIA headquarters to get as much information as we could. And then you just wandered around in shock, feeling so cut off because you're 12,000 miles away. I mean, cut off, stunned, and as if the world as you knew it has changed.
It was agonizing to watch. It was impossible not to. It's said that this was the moment TV news grew up. TV brought us together. For anyone with a flickering black and white screen, the death of this public man became a private tragedy. Walter Cronkite did not get home for 4 days. What reporter had ever known such pressure?
I was very conscious of delivering terrible news to the public with each bulletin, with each set of facts. It was with understanding it was going to have an impact on people. But there's not a lot you do about that. I mean, at times like that, we are really, and we always should be, and as a matter of fact, just a conduit. The whole thing was a period of terrible emotional stress for the American people. I don't think we've fully recovered from it yet, although we're doing better.
Ladies and gentlemen, in 1963, he was a Dallas newspaperman who covered the worst story ever to hit his town. Today, he is the co-anchor of the MacNeil-Lehrer Report, one of the country's most respected reporters. Jim Lehrer. I know Robert MacNeil was then Robert MacNeil of NBC News. He was in Dallas reporting it. Where were you?
I was working for the Dallas Times-Herald. The president was going to be in Dallas for a very brief period of time. And so the entire city news staff was involved in the coverage. My assignment was to cover his arrival at Dallas Love Field and stay there until he came back. But it's only going to be 2.5, 3 hours.
And where was he going to go? Back to Washington from there? Or was he was
yes, he was going back to Washington. He was flying in from Fort Worth, where he had spent the night, and then he was going to make the speech, do the motorcade, make the speech, get back on the plane, and then come back to Washington. And
perfect day, right?
Perfect day, perfect day. It's a quick in and out is what it was supposed to be.
So you were doing a sidebar on arrival
I was
at the airport.
part, yes, and I had done the security story because I was covering the federal beat at the time. I had written a security story about it, and the lead was they checked everything but the air President Kennedy will breathe while he is in Dallas. And then after he was shot and killed, they changed that lead to say, but it wasn't enough, and they kept that story on the front page. Amazing.
How did you hear about it?
I heard about it. I had gone back inside the airport after covering the arrival and talking to a rewrite man about the Kennedys coming and getting on the motorcade and leaving. And I was inside about to have lunch when a waitress came over and said, "Oh my God, they shot the president and the governor." I ran to a telephone. How I got through to the city desk, I don't know, but I did. And they said, "Well, it's true. Go to Parkland and then go to the police station. They may have arrested somebody."
Now, like you, are you working on adrenaline then, or are you feeling it?
It's astonishing. The thing, Larry, is that I was working as a reporter, but I also was a resident of Dallas, Texas. Now, keep in mind that we were then considered, correctly, the right-wing capital of the world. And I had the same reaction that the rest of the world had. Oh my God, somebody in the right wing did this. Right after I got through to the city desk, I called my house and talked to my wife, Kate. And I said, "Honey, have you heard?" She said, "Yes." I said, "Let's get out of here," meaning let's get out of Dallas. And, but, I mean, it was that, I mean, my reaction was the same as everybody else's. And then by the time I got to the police station, they had arrested Oswald. And I was there when they brought Oswald in. I stayed there for almost 2 days in the police station. And then I spent the next 2 years covering the story.
So it's probable that you the next day were watching you. Yeah. You were watching you on television.
Yeah, I mean, I asked Oswald what his name was. And
you saw Oswald?
Oh, yeah, and that midnight press conference where Ruby was there. I was standing next to Ruby, didn't realize who Ruby was. He had the name Jack Rubenstein, and I didn't make the connection until Ruby shot Oswald, and I said, "Oh my goodness!" I was standing. I remember this guy. I was there in this big crowded news.
Did both of you realize the bizarre nature of all of this? Television. Yeah. I mean, as bizarre as the audience were, it had to be as bizarre to you, right? I mean, did it seem unreal?
Totally mysterious.
Totally mysterious. Totally. I remember around midnight, that November 22nd, in this madhouse at the Dallas police station, talking to an FBI agent, because I was the federal reporter. I knew some of the FBI agents. And this agent said to me, he said, "Jim, everyone," and there was just people everywhere, you know, reporters, cops, agents, whatever. And it was noise and all that. He said, "Every one of us is going to remember everything that we did from 12:35 this afternoon. We're going to remember. I'm going to remember saying this to you, and I'm remembering what he said." I mean, we knew this was an incredible thing, And it seems, watching the tape and everything, it seems as incredible today, Larry, tonight, as it did November 22nd, 1963.
We'll come back. Harry Belafonte will be with us, Pierre Salinger, Ben Bradley, your phone calls. This is a Larry King TNT special, Where Were You, November 22nd, 1963. We're in Washington. Don't go away.
It was a shocking, saddening event. It took the life of a very outstanding young man who had won an election against a different generation to some extent.
When you're 6 inches tall, even little things can make for big adventures. The Borrowers, TNT's new family miniseries, premieres Saturday at 8 p.m. Eastern, only on TNT.
As this is said to be the decade families will be hunting for real value, Volvo thought it best to make that search a little easier. Introducing Volvo Affordable Pricing. Available on new 1994 cars, it's Volvo's way of hitting families right where it helps.
It's Thanksgiving again. Why not try something the whole family can feast on? MCI friends and family members can save up to 50% on daytime calls on Thanksgiving and lots of other holidays throughout the year.
Lasers. Satellites. Cellular data networks. What exactly have we launched here? UPS Total Track. The only tracking system that can confirm delivery of your air and designated ground packages coast to coast in seconds.
This package was signed for at 9:26 this morning by Mr.
The arms race may be over, but the package race is just heating up.
If your VCR is a pain to program, then get rid of it and get the RCA VCR with VCR Plus and cable box channel control. To record a show, just look for the VCR Plus code in your TV listing, then punch it in. It's as simple as that. So if you've had it with your old VCR, get rid of it and get the first one with VCR Plus and cable box channel control built in. Buy select RCA entertainment products and we'll send you Nipper and Chipper.
Noted wine critic Robert Parker recently called our Domaine Saint-Michel unquestionably the best bargain in American sparkling wines. This review pleased us so much, we almost went out and bought a bottle of Dom Perignon. Domaine Saint-Michel.
Weber, Hardaway, Warriors, Magic, Tuesday at 8 on TNT.
My name is Lois. I want to talk to you about something I just did. Something I've been meaning to do for some time. Find out more about Rogaine. You know, with minoxidil, whether it was for me. I'm telling you this because I think a lot of women may have the same questions I did. Well, now you know you're not alone. Here, boy. Where's your ball? Where's your ball? And there is some good news. See, it's never been easier to find out about Rogaine, if it's for you. There's this 800 number you can call about Rogaine. They'll send you a free information kit prepared especially for women. It's filled with all kinds of facts to help answer your questions about Rogaine. And because you need a prescription to get Rogaine, they also send you a list of local doctors offering a free private consultation to help you decide if Rogaine is right for you. That's how I got my questions answered. I hope you decide to call. I know I'm really glad I did.
Call now 1-800-388-8881 for a free information kit.
November 22nd, 1963. Where Were You? A Larry King TNT special live from Washington continues. Now, once again, Larry King.
Jim Lair and you down still with us. All of our guests will remain with us throughout the program, and there'll be interchange of thoughts and your phone calls as well. By the way, on November 22nd, 1963, I had just turned 30 years old, driving down Biscayne Boulevard in Miami when I heard it on my own radio station, WIOD. I drove to the station. Someone asked me if I knew Grant Stockdale, who was President Kennedy's ambassador to Ireland and a resident of Miami. I was told he was in Miami that weekend, so I called him, and he was unconsolable. He couldn't talk. He moaned. I never had experienced anything like it. Never had a phone conversation like it. We couldn't play it on the air. And I think it was 5 days later that Grant Stockdale killed himself by jumping off a building in downtown Miami. In the last 30 years, our idea of what's entertaining has changed completely. Show business is a different business. Now for a look at what was big in 1963, and from the people at the top, some personal reflections of November 22nd. We were watching the Dick Van Dyke Show, lining up to see Jack Lemmon, thrilling to the first James Bond movies, swaying to a young Barbra Streisand and a hip Henry Mancini. Our entertainment was smart, flip, funny, urbane. Take Rob and Laura Petrie, the classic New Frontier couple.
Mary very often wore the pillbox hat that Jackie Kennedy wore, and to my mind was somewhat the same type. Kind of wore the flip hairdo, and I thought Mary and Jackie Kennedy were very much the same type of woman.
Van Dyke and his cast were rehearsing in Hollywood on November 22nd, 1963.
We were in the living room set. We all just flopped down in chairs and stared at one another. And with Mary beginning to cry. And we just finally knocked off for the rest of the day.
Show business people were in love with Jack and Jackie. Hollywood knew a great entertainer when it saw one.
Happy birthday, Mr. President.
Kennedy was glamorous, witty, a crusader, and a fighter. He inspired a young rock and roller who was fighting the color barrier by doing a little thing called the twist.
I'm gonna sing my song, come twist along with me.
On November 22nd, Chubby Checker was preparing for the biggest TV appearance of his life.
I've never done 12 minutes on television to that point. In fact, very little TV at all, except for Bandstand, a few Ed Sullivan shows. And I was all pumped up about this in California, and you know, and the sun was shining, and we're watching Ferraris and all these great cars going down Sunset Strip, and someone said, someone shot President Kennedy in Dallas today. And the world stopped. Along with the TV show, along with the death of the president. When the president was assassinated, a lot of people were assassinated too. A lot of their hopes, their dreams, their expectations. It didn't get any better after that. It just got worse, because then after that, someone else became assassinated, someone else was killed, someone else was shot, and it just didn't stop.
In the early morning rain, with no place to go.
Peter, Paul, and Mary were singing a different kind of music. They too were just coming up, but they'd played for Kennedy at a 1961 fundraiser. They too felt tied to the president.
It was such an honor to sing for him, and we also met him. I mean, we were invested with a real belief in something, and that belief was so connected to his leadership.
And when the news from Dallas spread, it was a brutal shot of reality for the people in the fantasy business.
Someone told us on the set, and everybody just sort of went, for 5 minutes, nobody connected. We were dazed and walking around, at least I was. I couldn't believe it. I had known Jack Kennedy from Harvard, and Bobby. Not well, not a close friend, I wouldn't presume to say that, but I did know them. That made it even more touching.
I was in a jewelry shop buying my first piece of important jewelry, a beautiful, beautiful antique choker. It was $750, the most money I'd ever spent on anything in my life. I was the star of Funny Girl, and I never wear this piece of jewelry because of that.
I was rehearsing a play and went across the street to get a hero sandwich, and the guy making the sandwich says, "The president's been shot."
What'd you do?
I walked away without the sandwich, went back to rehearsal. The director dismissed the cast. I went home and grieved.
I was filming Marnie in Universal Studios in Burbank, and I had 2 hours free, and I went to the golf driving range in the valley. And, you know, there's usually an awful lot of noise going, clack, quack, quack, with hitting the balls and everything, and then suddenly it was stopped. And a lot of people were standing around crying. I didn't know what had happened. And a woman who was serving like hamburgers or something came running out of the place and told us. I jumped in the car and I went back to the studios, and they called it a day. Everybody was totally destroyed.
Now a major Hollywood power, Barry Diller was a 19-year-old secretary at the William Morris Agency.
It became odd and ethereal, and everyone was strange. Everyone drifted home. They really did lose their interest in their work. For agents, that's tough to do.
From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, some 38 minutes ago.
Theater went dark that night. There was nothing but assassination news. But somewhere in Hollywood, one performance went on. It was a private, painful scene.
The only record album that I ever made in my life, called Songs I Like by Dick Van Dyke, and I apologize for that. It went straight from the presses to the $1.99 sale counter, but I had to record it that night. The orchestra was out from New York, and everybody was there, so it had to be done. And we recorded it that night, and the whole orchestra is sitting there with tears running down their cheek.
America seemed to become a less comfortable place after Kennedy died. The urbane Dick Van Dyke Show, the carefree twist, gave way to entertainment brimming with cynical anger and disillusionment. As the decade rolled on, looking at TV or the movies was like looking in a mirror, and we didn't look happy. The assassination would always weigh on young Americans who would grow up to become stars.
That was my first experience of loss of somebody that I felt was close or that I knew even though I didn't. And I do think it did symbolize a loss of a whole period of a spirit. It was a very special time. I've come to realize that it was a special time.
His image as a father really meant something to me at that age. And those shots of Caroline and John, as he was then, were just emotionally devastating, you know, because we need a father. We need someone to lead. We need someone in charge. We need someone that says, this is where we're going, you know. And for that person to be taken away was really overwhelming.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are honored to welcome a man whose leadership in both civil rights and show business has never waned. Not in 1963 and not now. A true legend, Harry Belafonte. Where were you?
I was in Paris the week prior to this event. We had held a number of strategic meetings discussing and defining the plight of the civil rights movement. We were in desperate need of funds to continue our organizing and educating. And America was so conflicted on the issue of race and what we were trying to achieve that I had suggested that perhaps we should take our cause globally. That we had a number of friends around the world who were very sympathetic to what we were doing, and if we could organize them, we might be able to find new resources of financing and funding. And Dr. King and others having agreed with this, my first stop was Paris. And I had just arrived. I was at a studio. They were shooting a film called Top Cappy. It was Jules Dassin and Melina Mercouri. And later on that evening, we were to have dinner with Simon Signoret and Yves Montand and a number of artists in France who were going to become part of this new Friends of the Civil Rights Movement. We subsequently went, but we were at the studio, and when word came through that President Kennedy had been shot, everybody was stunned. And like most people, I think just the idea that he was shot still kept the idea in a safe zone. It was not quite as tragic as it ultimately became. The fact that he was shot, hoped it wasn't going to be too bad, maybe wounded. But then shortly after that, word came that he had died. And it absolutely paralyzed me. Not just the loss of a president and a significant force in American history at that time, but this country was at the verge of being ripped apart. The earliest aspects of the anti-war movement had just begun to take place on campuses around America. The black cause had polarized and divided people severely in this country. And Kennedy was very pivotal to much that we were doing.
What was it like, though, being in a foreign country when your leader is killed, not being home?
Well, not ironically, but oddly enough, my first thought was to come home. Paris was no place for me to be. I had to come home to my family, my children, my wife. I had to come home to the movement. I had to come home to America, because this vacuum of information, filled only with this horrible news that Kennedy had been murdered, struck fear in my heart. I must admit quite honestly that a concern that tugged at me very deeply was, could it be possible that the assassin was black? There was so much on the line, and my great concern was that if it were a person of color, so much that we were striving for would have taken a severe turn.
Did you know the president?
Oh, yes.
Like him?
Yes, I liked him.
Some civil rights leaders were disappointed.
Well, I was one of them, but I liked him. And I had faith that his moral courage, his moral center, would permit him to make courageous political decisions.
Which he had not yet made.
No, not yet made. The first time I met him was that he had come to my home. A great American personality, Jackie Robinson, had found disaffection with the Democratic Party.
Voted for Nixon.
Yep, he worked for Nixon. And the Democratic Party, having been very nervous about this, began to reach out to other prominent black personalities, and I was one of the first, and Kennedy came to my home to speak about working for him during the campaign and supporting his aspirations to the presidency.
Did you?
Yes, I did.
Harry Belafonte is with us. So is Hugh Downs. So is Jim Lair. We did promise we would include your phone calls. There's lots to come, and we'll take some calls. Detroit, Michigan. Hello.
Yes, I was stationed on Andrews Air Force Base the night they brought Kennedy's body back. It was very scary. We did not know where the threat was coming from, whether the Russians had assassinated Kennedy, who had assassinated Kennedy, and what was going on. The base was closed up. You couldn't move around on the base. FBI, Secret Service, and everybody was everywhere. People were just running around and running into each other and just afraid to talk to each other. It was very, very scary, like the world had come to an end.
Were you in the Air Force?
I was in the Navy across from the Air Force side. We did proficiency flying for the people out of the Pentagon and people around the Washington area.
Did you see the people get off the plane?
Yes, we could see it pretty clear. The little duty hut we had was right across from the area where they brought the body off the plane.
And there was fear in Washington that you still didn't know what it was and that more might come?
There was fear on the base. I had been out to take an engine down to Pax River, Maryland, and to come back onto the base, I knew the gate guard. I had been out to the bars with a gate guard, and it took me a half an hour to get back on the base because of the security. It was just scary.
Thank you for that. I guess reflection goes fast. Were there a lot of thoughts that this was some sort of plot larger than the killing of one person?
Oh, I remember that, yes.
Yeah, I do too.
As long as it was mysterious. That's what was so unsettling about it. You didn't know what was behind this force. And that added to the grief of it. The unsettled feeling persisted for quite a long time.
You remember it that way too, Jim?
I do, but on the ground in Dallas, all the attention went to this one man, Lee Harvey Oswald, and very quickly it was established that he had a an association with Cuba and in the left and the communist kind of thing, and all the attention went there. But then that ignited even more questions about whether or not it was whether or not they were going to.
And Harry, were you relieved, in a sense, when you learned it was not a person of color?
Yes, honestly, I was. It didn't lessen the tragedy, but there was enormous relief that it had not been someone of color.
Schertz, Texas. Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. I'm Mrs. Cook.
Where were you, Mrs. Cook?
My husband and I were in my living room and watching TV. And we saw Jackie lean over the back of the car. She picked up something I found out later from a newspaper that she was trying to push his brain back in.
Was there live television in Dallas that day?
Evidently, yes, because we were watching it as it happened.
I have no memory. Do you know that, too?
No, there was no. There was no, as Hugh had said earlier, there was no live television. There was no way to get the pictures that she's talking about were the Zapruder film and none of those things weren't shown on television for years afterward.
So time, though, has clouded the mind to make some people think they were watching it.
I think that's true, and all of the reports from Parkland were by telephone, actually.
That's right.
And the Zapruder film was when, the 70s? Until we...
Yeah, because Life magazine immediately bought the rights to that film. And nobody else could even, the FBI and the Secret Service got it, but no television network got it.
I think Lee Harvey Oswald's murder was live, and I think most people make the association that everything was live.
That's right.
And then also in irony, isn't it, Harry, that it was Kennedy's death spurring Johnson that got the Civil Rights Bill passed?
Yep, Johnson picked up the torch for the Great Society.
We'll be right back with more. Our numbers east of the Mississippi, 1-800-879-2166. West of the Mississippi, 1-800-879-3166. Pierre Salinger, Ben Bradley, and more on this TNT special, Where Were You? I'm Larry King in Washington. Don't go away.
I think Jack Kennedy could have been the best president we've had so far.
Capture him. From TNT comes a new motion picture, Geronimo. The legend is never before told. Premieres Sunday, December 5th on TNT.
Braun Flex Control. The first electric shaver with a pivoting head. Flex Control automatically adjusts to every contour of your face. Under the chin, under the lip, that tricky spot under your nose. You'll get the closest Braun shave yet. Flex Control from Braun, the last word in shavers.
This is the Infiniti J30. Oh, and this is the clock in the J. There's an interesting reason it looks like it does. Infiniti realized the clock is the one instrument in the car everyone uses. So they felt it should stand out. Now, if they put that much thought into the clock, imagine the other thoughtful extremes they went to. Visit your Infiniti showroom. Oh, tell them you already know the part about the clock.
Lease one of the world's most advanced automobiles, now at a very special rate for a limited time.
If your VCR is a pain to program, then get rid of it and get the RCA VCR with VCR Plus and cable box channel control. To record a show, just look for the VCR Plus code in your TV listing, then punch it in. It's as simple as that. So if you've had it with your old VCR, get rid of it and get the first one with VCR Plus and cable box channel control built in. Buy select RCA entertainment products and we'll send you Nipper and Chipper.
AT&T says MCI only saves you pennies. So we just wanted to remind you how fast pennies add up.
If you suffer from awful sinus attacks, try Dristan Sinus. Unlike these, Dristan Sinus has a decongestant and the modern pain reliever ibuprofen to relieve sinus pain, all without drowsiness. Dristan Sinus, the face of relief today.
TBS presents 21 hours of Eastwood.
That's so.
9 classic flicks.
I don't like violence.
Beginning 9:05 Eastern, Thanksgiving Day on TBS.
You won't forget me now, will you?
Hi, it's Larry King. On Thanksgiving week, we'll welcome Angelica Houston from Addams Family Values, Shari Lewis in Lamb Chop, and Broadway's Comden and Green on Larry King Live weeknights 9 Eastern on CNN.
Some small people will take your family on a big adventure. The Borrowers begins Saturday on TNT.
This is an important message for Comcast customers. Your October-November monthly billing statement may be for a 43-day period. Please note in the left-hand column of your bill the adjustment dates for the days of service not previously billed. And please bear with us as we make the changes required by the FCC. All of us here at Comcast, thank you.
Comcast, we make you feel at home.
For all your home improvement needs, you can trust Bar Lumber Company. We're your neighborhood specialist in hardware, paint, lumber, and power tools. To handle your toughest jobs, choose a tool that is guaranteed tough. DeWalt offers a full line of portable, high-performance, heavy-duty power tools. At Bar Lumber, you'll find a complete selection of DeWalt tools, all backed by a 30-day satisfaction guarantee. So come to Bar Lumber, your friendly home improvement center, with convenient hours and 7 locations to serve you.
Once again, live from Washington, Larry King.
President Reagan was filming his last movie. It was called The Killers, based on the Ernest Hemingway story. President Eisenhower was at a special meeting at the UN where everyone stopped and prayed in their own special way, their own special faith, based on their own special upbringing. Hubert Humphrey was addressing a conference, immediately rushed back to his office, closed the door, and tape recorded every memory he had of John F. Kennedy. He thought someday there might be a library that might like that. The national economy rides on optimism, so when JFK was killed, the business world took the news especially hard. How America's place in the world has changed in the last 30 years. Take a look.
Yes, fun to see, fun to drive, fun to buy. The new Chevrolet.
Big cars, cheap gas, open roads. No question which country was strongest or which was having the most fun. Who boasted General Motors, Pan Am, IBM? They were giants, icons, showing the world how to do business.
A, you knew you were on top of the world. Probably you couldn't even spell the word Japan. B, the world looked like completely your oyster at that stage of the game.
Imports. Who needed imports? Who'd even heard of Toyota? America was going places. Kennedy embodied the national swagger.
You were not squashed down by events or by economic difficulties or by failures of your own. He communicated self-confidence and made you feel confident about yourself.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Nobody laughed. We went.
You couldn't imagine that any cloud could possibly scud across the American sky, which may have been why the Kennedy thing was so disorienting. In reality, if we'd had telescopes on, we would have seen some of the first Volkswagens arriving at about the same time and have known what that was the precursor of and so on. But invincible is almost too weak a word.
At the Ford Motor Company, a young car guy named Lee Iacocca was about to put the Kennedy spirit on wheels.
I always thought that our new little Mustang pony car sort of symbolized Kennedy. It was we were going to introduce it at the World's Fair. We did, 5 months after he was assassinated. But it was a car for the 60s, for young people, there were fun times in the 60s. We thought they would be, and the assassination set the decade back.
On November 22nd, a young entrepreneur working his way up was a long way from home, which was Dallas.
Walking from an American Airlines airplane into the airport in Rochester, New York, EDS was 1 year old. I was recruiting systems engineers at Eastman Kodak. and I'll never forget it. Because, number one, you couldn't believe it happened. Number two, we didn't know whether he had been killed or was just wounded. And it was a sad day. And I spent the whole weekend on the road, and I was coming back to Dallas Sunday, and the pilot interrupted on the air to say that Lee Harvey Oswald had been shot. Now, all of this happened in my hometown, and I wasn't there, and it was just hard to believe that these things could have occurred or did occur, and it's a tragic loss.
By the 70s and 80s, many of the old business giants turned out to be all too mortal. IBM struggling, General Motors humbled by Japan, Pan Am gone for good. The competition seemed to blindside American business. We've seen gas lines, recession, Chapter 11. It's no longer clear who's number one. It's no longer so simple. It's no longer quite so much fun. They say JFK's murder took away America's innocence. Did it take away the swagger, too?
Yeah, I think it made a lot of cynics, a lot of people wondering what this world was all about and what it was coming to. And what could be worse than the assassination of a popular president at the time? What could be worse? I can't think of anything.
And we have also just learned that this program originally announced that 90 minutes will be 2 hours tonight. We have other panelists and other calls and other film clips to show you, so we will be running for 2 hours on this TNT special. What was the effect of that event, Jim, on the rest of these 30 years? I mean, was it the forerunner of the decline of America in many respects?
Larry, I think that's putting a kind of a strong twist to it. I think that you have to remember, Iacocca said, you remember a popular president was killed. The fact of the matter is, Kennedy was not that popular in the polls at the time he was killed. But what he did, even those who did not agree with him politically, and as you said, Harry, there were some in the civil rights community that had their problems with Kennedy or whatever, it was more of his persona that he, it wasn't a case that you agreed with him or disagreed with him. It was, here was this, he showed what we all would wish that we were, you see, and not politically, but just in terms of, as the clip said, we'll go to the moon. We all wish we could go to the moon.
Yeah, but didn't we lose our innocence that day, little Hugh?
In a very real sense, I think. Some of that may have happened even had Kennedy lived and served out his term. But I think things were brought on that would not have occurred as fast without that. We lost our innocence. And I think the main hallmark was confusion. We lost a leader, and we were kind of backing and filling and not knowing just where to go or what to do. And I'm not sure that Lyndon Johnson answered that. Maybe nobody could have. But
we'll get some calls in. But Harry, what do you think of the post-legacy?
I believe that the assassination of Kennedy put the key in the door to the loss of innocence. Johnson moving in to take over as swiftly as he did and to bring to this country the whole Great Society and the civil rights bills that were passed was further violated by a promise that was severely ruptured when the Gulf of Tonkin and the war in Vietnam escalated. It seemed like all truth could no longer be trusted, or at least things that we believed to be true. Kennedy was assassinated. Lyndon Baines Johnson talking that there would be no more, as a matter of fact, there would be no war in Vietnam. We would pull out, things would de-escalate, but instead, behind the scenes, the war escalated and became a great tragedy. Then Martin Luther King was assassinated, and then that was when I think America really thought that its innocence was
So we lost
gone.
it in the late 60s.
Yeah.
Indianapolis on this special program. Hello.
Yes, I was a young man at that time, stationed in Japan, and the most vivid recollection out of that day, and that has stayed with me, is the Japanese people just outside the base, the crying, waving white handkerchiefs, saying Kennedy's name over and over and over again.
Wow. Do you realize the worldwide impact?
Well, yeah, I knew there was a worldwide impact. I'm curious as to what this caller might think was the reason that the Japanese would be that moved.
The initial impression, because we were, the minute this happened, we sealed our base up. We were put on an immediate alert status. They thought this was an impending act, possibly leading to a major war or major conflict again. And the emotional feeling of America's president has been shot. They could not comprehend that.
So the confusion was international, you could say.
Dallas, Texas, hello.
Yes, sir. I was 11 years old in class, and I can remember my teacher, big strapping guy that looked like he ought to be on a football field instead of in a classroom, told us that our president had been killed, and he just broke down and cried, and it still affects me now. And I can remember seeing the grief and feeling scared, and then him saying, children, we need to pray for our nation. And 30 years later, I can still feel the pain and the grief and the being frightened and afraid.
Thank you, ma'am. When we come back, we'll be joined by one of the great newspapermen of this era or any era, Ben Bradley, close friend of John Kennedy's. Don't go away.
I had a very jocular teacher, had a great sense of humor, and suddenly his face just, someone came in and whispered something to him, and he said, we're all going into the church now. The president's been shot.
Weber, Hardaway, at the draft, they were traded for each other. Huh? Now the league's top rookies meet for the first time. Warriors, Magic, Tuesday at 8 on TNT.
Nokia. You already know how to use it. Nokia, connecting people.
Hi, can we see your Christmas tree?
My tree?
We heard about your tree.
I heard about
I want to see that
Why?
tree.
Mister, can I watch your tree?
Watch?
The tree, yeah.
Wow, it turns.
Bring your Christmas tree to life with Noma Ornimotion, the little motors that turn ornaments into crowd pleasers.
May I see your tree?
Ornimotion, another bright idea from the people at Noma.
Car has finally grown up. Introducing the Volvo 850 Sports Wagon.
I love you.
Champagne is now being served on the after deck.
By the way, when will your inheritance come through?
Lobster is now being served on the promenade deck.
I love your villa at Monte Carlo.
Colombian coffee is now being served in the starboard side lounge.
No wonder so many people's preferences lean toward 100% Colombian coffee. It's the richest coffee in the world, handpicked by Juan Valdez.
I think we have a little problem here.
Joey has to come with us on vacation.
Joey's going on vacation with his own family.
I'm not leaving without Joey.
They have fantastic pools at this hotel.
I do everything with Joey.
Well, they have a camp?
Just for kids. A huge water slide.
Ginormous water slide.
Dear Joey, sorry you couldn't be here.
Who'd have thought we'd make such a big splash with everyone?
I'm not going home without Sam.
Hyatt, we've thought of everything.
Geronimo, the legend as never before told. Premieres Sunday, December 5th on TNT.
NASCAR Racing Thrills on ESPN. All season long, our award-winning race team puts you on the track, bumper to bumper, with the world's top NASCAR drivers. Experience the speed, hear the excitement, and feel the danger. Don't miss high-powered NASCAR Racing Thrills on ESPN.
For all your home improvement needs, you can trust Bar Lumber Company. We're your neighborhood specialist in hardware, paint, lumber, and power tools. Open your house to the outdoors with fine aluminum and vinyl products by Marshall. Design, beauty, and value have made Marshall the preferred choice at Bar Lumber. Whether it's new construction or remodeling, Marshall has the aluminum and vinyl products you're looking for. Marshall products add an elegant touch to any home. So come to Bar Lumber, your friendly home improvement center, with convenient hours and 7 locations to serve you.
November 22nd, 1963. Where were you? A Larry King TNT special live from Washington. Ladies and gentlemen, Larry King.
Welcome back. We're going for another full hour. Harry Belafonte is with us, one of the great legendary figures in American show business history. You just packed him in Germany. Harry Belafonte was in Paris the day Kennedy was killed. Jim Lehrer of the McNeil-Lehrer Report, one of journalism's better moments. On a nightly basis, Mr. Lehrer was he was part of a team of reporters covering in Dallas, November 22nd, 1963 for the Dallas Times-Herald. And Hugh Downs, who was then the anchor of the Today Show. Hugh Downs, now of course the co-anchor with Barbara Walters of ABC's 2020. Hugh was walking in the hall after lunch when he heard the news. The politicians who shared power with John Kennedy have special memories of him, even the Republicans. And so did those in the generation that followed. Among them, the President of the United States. Watch.
I was in 4th period advanced math. There were 7 students in the class. And the teacher, we met in an annex. The teacher was the assistant principal for the annex building. And he was called to the phone, something that, as far as I know, never happened at any other time. He came back totally ashen-faced. I'll never forget it in my life. I never saw such a desolate look on a man's face, and said that the president had been shot and probably killed.
You had you had met him?
Yes, that was November. I had met him in July.
I was in school. I was walking along the pathway. I think I was a sophomore in high school, and a classmate said, "Did you hear the news?" And I said, "No, what?" And he told me, and it just hit like a thunderbolt.
You don't have Nixon to kick around anymore.
After losing the presidency to Kennedy in 1960 and the California governorship in '62, Richard Nixon went back to practicing law. Eerily, on November 22nd, he flew out of Dallas on business. Did you believe the Warren Commission?
I did not study it carefully, and I have never questioned it before, and I don't question it now. A lot is being read, but the reason that I don't is just nothing's going to happen as a result.
Barry Goldwater would be the next Republican nominee in '64. He and Kennedy were friends. They'd already planned their campaign.
That would have been one hell of a campaign. We were going to either rent an airplane or buy an airplane, and for example, we'd go to Omaha, and he'd get off and make this pitch, and then I would rebut. Then we'd fly, say, to Sioux City, and I would make the opening, and he would rebut. And in this way, we felt the American people could learn about debate and about the issues and about what each side thought.
For a man who would one day be president, politics was still a long way off in 1963. It was the end of the peanut season.
Getting ready to gin cotton, and had come back from lunch, heard that Kennedy had been shot. I assumed at first it was not serious, and then the word came through that he was dead. I went out in the back, sat on the steps and cried, and have never gotten over it.
Jimmy Carter never met Kennedy, but the president whom Carter would defeat in 1976 had a personal connection.
When I first went to the Congress in 1949, by pure happenstance, my office in the old House Office building was right across the corridor from Congressman John F. Kennedy. So over the next 4 to 6 years, Jack Kennedy and I became very good personal friends.
Another Republican on the rise in 1963 would 20 years later become Ronald Reagan's Secretary of State. A young George Shultz spent that terrible day at his desk at the Labor Department in the heart of a stricken capital.
It was quiet, dead, depressed. We had some, we thought, important meetings that were about to happen, and they just didn't happen. Nobody canceled them, they just didn't happen. We all sat around and talked to each other.
When it became clear what had happened, the best thing that we could think to do was to go down to church, St. Charles Borromeo Church in Brooklyn Heights, and look for some consolation there. Because it was clear that listening to the descriptions of what was going on, nobody really understood why should this happen. And Kennedy was much more than a human being. I mean, he was a force that represented so much in the society, so much by way of aspiration and hope, that when all of that was dashed, it was an extraordinary experience. It was a disorienting experience.
Politics is different now. Gary Hart and Bill Clinton tried to reignite the Kennedy flame. It's been hard. It seems harder now to believe the way so many believed in JFK. And now 2 generations share power, JFK's and the next. The nation's top Democrat today was in high school in a math class on November 22nd, 1963. The top Republican was already in Congress.
I was on an airplane headed for Kansas City, and between Washington, D.C. and Chicago, we heard about the terrible tragedy. I'd met him, had a picture taken with him, and I'm certain he didn't know Bob Dole, but I knew Jack Kennedy, the President of the United States.
Few men were closer to President Kennedy than our next special guest. He was both a personal friend and a professional journalist. Please welcome a principal figure in Washington for these 30 years and more, the retired executive editor of the Washington Post, the ageless Ben Bradley. How close a friend?
Yeah, well, it's self-serving, but he was a good friend.
One of your better friends?
Yes.
Make it difficult to cover him because of that?
Yes, from time to time.
Where were you when he died, Ben?
I was on my lunch hour in a bookstore at the bottom of the press building, reading, you know, through the stacks, and suddenly I heard people start to whisper, and it got louder and louder, and the word "shot" came through, and then Kennedy came through. And I rushed up to my office, which was on the 12th floor. And
you were with Newsweek then?
I was the bureau chief of, I think I was the bureau chief, maybe I wasn't. Yeah, I was the bureau chief of Newsweek. And the ticker, UP ticker, was there with that terrible bell going incessantly. And I read the dispatch that he was been shot. And then very quickly the dispatch that he was dead.
2 things are happening here. Newsweek, I think, goes to bed, as they say, on a Saturday, right?
Comes out Friday night is the point of no return.
So are you first now a close friend who's lost a close friend, or are you the bureau chief?
Well, you had to be both. I mean, you couldn't stop being one, and yet you had a job, and I think that's what saved me. I had so much to do. I mean, they threw out the whole magazine and started a new magazine. But there was this terrible moment of trying to come to grips with something that defied understanding. And one of the things that I don't remember paying any attention to who killed him. I mean, it was of no moment to me.
That would have been different.
Well, I think I did share Harry's flash that I hoped it wasn't a black man.
You did too?
Yes, I did.
But you were concentrating on, of course, the loss of...
You had a loss of a friend and so much to do. I mean, we were saved by our work. We were saved by our work. We had to assign. I had to write a piece for the overnight, and then there was a when the president's body came back.
Where were you?
Well, I went out to that hospital and waited. I think someone just thought it might be a good idea if some of the friends were there, and it was a terrible night.
That was the hospital where
the Kennedy's body was taken, and where Mrs. Kennedy came, and where all the friends were gathered, and where the decision started to be made as to where he would be buried. And
were you a journalist there or a friend?
Well, I guess, I mean, I was a friend there because I wouldn't have been invited if I had been if I'd just been a journalist.
So did you then do a story about that or not?
I did a story for the paper, for the magazine about an appreciation of him, and I talked to the reporter who wrote the final story. But what went on in that hospital suite was of no great historical moment. It was a personal thing.
What did you mean by the term "Johnny, we hardly knew ye"?
Well, that's an old Irish song. That wasn't mine. That was Kenny O'Donnell's and Dave.
But the term itself is one of obvious closeness and friendship and missing and.
Well, it was the thing that nobody got to know him because his life was cut off in the he was only 45. How old was he? 45, and that's
45.
He'd
46, I think.
He'd still be kicking around now. God knows what he would have been doing since 19.
What kind of friend was he?
Well, if your friend is the President of the United States, the rules are different. You're a friend at you're at his beck and call. You don't go there if you're not asked.
I mean, it's not like dropping in.
No, you don't drop in, and he doesn't drop in back. As he said, you go into the White House with the friends you have. You don't make any new ones. And I think that was true.
Really?
Yeah.
No, I mean, that's surprising.
Well, I mean, there aren't... The social occasions where you meet and make new friends don't pop up much at the White House.
You got a good point, man.
And you would never know, once you were the president, you would not know who was really a friend or who was currying favor. You're cut off from that. So.
You are.
And when someone that young dies and you're that age, are there feelings of your own mortality?
Well, they had probably already set in, but yes, I think, sure. I mean, he was
not supposed to die.
Oh, no, he wasn't supposed to die.
Not that way.
Yeah.
Not anyway.
Not then.
Yeah,
not then and not anyway. And so much of his presidency seemed to me, and even then, on the come, the thing that I missed was the promise that seemed to exist in America at that time. And I missed that. I don't see that. I don't know whether America lost its innocence or not, but there was a surge of joy and hope and promise and confidence that seems to me to have gone out of us at that time.
And not back.
Well, not all the way back. No, it's not back.
And we'll be back with more. Pierre Salinger still to come, and more phone calls and some surprises as well. Don't go away. Now does it...
Those 3 days until the funeral, I think I did nothing else except watch television.
Before he was president, he was a World War II hero.
Get those men out of the water!
Cliff Robertson stars in the true story of John F. Kennedy and the crew of PT-109. Tonight at 9:30 Eastern on TNT.
Will we claim the new Norelco razor shaves closer than ever without hundreds of tests to back it up? Say our new Precision Groove helps the Norelco lift and cut system shave closer without proof? No. We wouldn't say it's our closest shave ever without science, sensors, tests. But of all the tests that prove it's closer, the most convincing requires a personal touch. The new Norelco razors, our closest shave ever.
This may seem like any other day, but it's not. Because now people will be able to talk to one another in a brand new way. That's because across the US and Canada, leading cellular communications companies have joined together to create MobileLink, a new standard in cellular service. So now, whenever you need to stay in touch, MobileLink will make it as simple as a phone call. MobileLink.
Hello?
I'm glad you called. It's simply the way to communicate. To order, call 1-800-995-4000.
As this is said to be the decade families will be hunting for real value, Volvo thought it best to make that search a little easier. Introducing Volvo Affordable Pricing. Available on new 1994 cars, it's Volvo's way of hitting families right where it helps.
There are just two reasons to buy a Macintosh personal computer instead of a PC. One, Macintosh does more. Two, Macintosh costs less. Which really makes your choice quite simple.
Weber, Hardaway, Warriors, Magic, Tuesday at 8 on TNT.
No matter what you need a truck for, Joe McPherson Chevrolet in the Irvine Auto Center is your Southern California truck headquarters. Rugged, reliable, and built to last, we've got the truck you need at a price you've just got to say yes to. Great trucks, great deals at Joe McPherson Chevrolet, your kinder, gentler Chevy dealer in Orange County. Lake Forest exit off the San Diego Freeway in the Irvine Auto Center.
So I'm at my Chevy Geo dealer, just $189 a month to lease a 94 Geo Prism, right? Right, he says. Yeah, but I don't want lease payments till I'm old and gray. What's my monthly payment for 36 months? He says $189 a month. Tell me about the down payment. He says there is no down payment. What about extras like air conditioning and dual airbags? He still says $189 a month. I say, sold.
Get to know Geo Prism with a $189 a month GMAC Smart Lease at your Southern California Chevy Geo dealer.
Now, once again, Larry King.
We're back on this special TNT edition of November 22nd, 1963. Where were you? Our numbers east of the Mississippi, 1-800-879-2166. West of the Mississippi, 800-879-3166. With Ben Bradley, Harry Belafonte, Jim Lair, and Hugh Downs. We'll start intermingling more phone calls, as well as some comments from the gang. Boulder, Colorado, hello.
Yes, hello. The death of President Kennedy was perhaps my very first memory. I was 3, almost 4 years old, living in Biloxi, Mississippi. My mom had just put me down for my afternoon nap while she watched the soap operas. And all of a sudden she came running into the room and she kept saying, "Don't forget this day, never forget this. This is important to remember. The President of the United States has been killed." And I didn't really know who the president was or what that was all about, but I remember so clearly sitting in the living room on the floor while she was crying, watching the TV and holding her hand. And I remember watching John, and Carolyn and feeling that they'd lost their dad. And it's always been such a startling memory to me, such an important first memory.
Why are we, Harry, do you think, transfixed by it? I mean, it's 30 years and the image comes up on the screen and you cannot not look at it.
I think it's just very hard to accept the fact that this thing happened. This thing happened in America. This thing happened at a time when so much was, the expectations were so high. So many promises were in the air. So much was involved in that time that the death of Kennedy became synonymous with. Whether we fulfilled it or failed to fulfill it will always be measured by whether or not Kennedy was alive. Like Bill just said, had he lived, what would the world have turned out to be?
Jim?
Yeah, I agree with that. It was the first monumental tragedy that we had had here in this country. We'd had wars, but the wars had all been fought somewhere else. They were personal tragedies to the families of people who died in these wars. But this happened right here, and we've had. If it were happened tomorrow, it would be another one of those things, one of those terrible tragedies. But this was the first one of that magnitude.
You?
Yeah, in a way, it was the first one after Lincoln, I'd say, because But we have to remember, Lincoln was killed, McKinley was killed, there were attempts on Garfield, there were attempts on the life of Harry Truman and Ronald Reagan. So assassination is not totally foreign to the American character, unfortunately. But what then is it about the fact that when Kennedy was killed, something bigger happened? And I haven't sorted that out myself yet, but I admit what you say.
Okay, 30 years we haven't sorted out. Ben thinks it was the loss of promise. Had to be more than that.
Well, what kind of a country would it be that was not transfixed by this event? I mean, you'd have to be...
30 years of transfixion.
30 years.
He goes up in popularity every year, according to polls. I guess if students voted today, he comes in the most popular president.
Well, I don't have to explain it to myself. I was devastated by it, and something that devastating to a country deserves to be remembered.
Fort Worth, Texas. Hello.
Mr. Lair mentioned earlier that this was really a turnaround trip to Dallas, but the Kennedys did have one more trip, one more stop to make, and I'm holding in my hands the tickets that we had to the dinner in Austin, Texas that night. We left Midland, Texas so excited over the fact that we were going to get to be at the dinner, and about San Angelo, Texas, we heard it on the news.
I stand corrected. I had completely forgotten about that they were going to Austin, because there was a big hullabaloo about whether it was Senator Yarborough's trip or Vice President Johnson's trip, all the politics. I stand corrected, ma'am.
You still have the tickets, ma'am?
Yes, I have them in my hand.
What does it say?
It says Texas welcome dinner in honor of President John F. Kennedy and Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson, Municipal Auditorium.
Scheduled for Friday night?
City of Austin, 7:30 o'clock, Friday evening, November 22nd, 1963.
Thank you.
Yes.
Warwick, New York. Hello.
Hi, I was a Peace Corps volunteer in West Africa, in Senegal, and we were just sitting down to dinner about 7 o'clock, and a knock came at the door, and a small Senegalese boy came in and said in Wolof, the chief is dead, or your chief is dead. And we looked at each other and said, he must mean de Gaulle. And when we said that, the kid shook his head and said, no, your chief. And we looked at each other and said, could he possibly mean Kennedy? And the kid nodded his head, and we said, must be something wrong. And we went down to the local Senegalese army post and heard it on their shortwave radio. And all the next day, Senegalese we didn't know at all came trooping to the house. They would shake our hands, stay for 5 minutes, and not say a word, shake our hands again and leave.
This worldwide impact, explain, I mean, all presidents have a power and impact, but this touching people in Senegal and in Tokyo and in, I didn't ask you, in Paris, were there much dismay in Paris?
Enormous dismay. But when you talk about the developing nations, as young as the idea was, the Peace Corps had taken very, very strong hold in developing countries. There was a huge promise to this American experiment, this world experiment. And everywhere volunteers went, it was the best part of America that was being expressed in the remotest villages of the world. The nobility and the honor of this country was at stake, or at least being interpreted by every volunteer. So the loss of this man who was so pivotal to this experiment carried a wave of great pain and anguish for people who then said, what will happen?
So there wasn't a place anywhere on the globe this didn't touch emotionally?
One really has to understand, I think Bill is right, he doesn't have to remember, but Kennedy was involved with so much hope globally, so much promise. He had confronted the Bay of Pigs, he was getting along with Khrushchev, and they were working things out. I mean, he didn't back off the civil rights movement. I'm surprised that there aren't some women on the panel here. because women in that period were beginning to all of a sudden become ennobled themselves.
We tried, but in 1963, first of all, you tried to limit a panel, and Barbara Walters was going to try very hard to make it, but she had to be in Seattle. But prominent women in 1963.
Journalists, you mean?
Women journalists weren't, right, Ben?
I guess the ones that were most prominent then aren't with us anymore. Eleanor Roosevelt.
Eleanor Roosevelt.
Well, there was May Craig. May Craig of the Portland Press Herald, that wonderful little hat that came down over her head.
But my only point is that I believe that much of America's bewilderment is that women are in struggle for their rights, homosexuals, blacks, everybody, unemployment, AIDS. There seems to be just such tremendous chaos. And the only time we can remember, at least in my adult life, where America was at its best and there was a promise for good things was the Kennedy era.
It was pre-nitty-gritty, though.
That's absolutely.
I mean, it was before it got down to the cut.
It was promise.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hello.
Hello there. I was in Houston, Texas, at my father's feet. He was at that time, he was the editor of the state desk for the Houston Post. And we were at home. Mother was fixing something in the kitchen. And the phone rang, and I didn't see my father, as I believe Mr. Downs said, for 4 days. But he did call in from time to time, and the thing that I found most amazing was my mother telling me what was going on, and the fact that he couldn't get a hold of... He kept trying to get information out of Dallas, and he couldn't get anything. He talked to people up there, and they wouldn't say anything. It was his experience. And it was very frustrating for him. He wanted to talk to Oswald. Oswald was saying he wanted to talk to the press. They had the press conference. He couldn't get up there. It was like 15 minutes. And then they had the press conference. And then he came home, went to sleep, got up. It was that afternoon, and they shot Oswald. Exactly. And he was gone for another 3 days.
Do we remember it as a haze of confusion, Jim Hugh?
Sure. You notice he used the term, they shot Oswald? It's interesting.
They shot Oswald.
They shot Oswald. It's, I've heard other people refer to this whole thing. They shot Kennedy, they shot Oswald. It's kind of they. I don't mean a big conspiracy. It's just the way people think of it.
We'll get a break and come back, and Pierre Salinger will join us. Don't go away. You know, that's...
He was trying to do something that we desperately needed. We needed unity in our country. We needed racial unity. He was just there at the right time, and when he got shot, that was it.
Coming up, a naval commander and his crew clash with an enemy destroyer in the Pacific. Cliff Robertson plays war hero John F. Kennedy in PT 109. Then, TNT recounts your memories of the Kennedy assassination in an encore presentation of the Larry King Special, November 22nd, 1963. Where were you?
If your VCR is a pain to program, then get rid of it and get the RCA VCR with VCR Plus and cable box channel control. To record a show, just look for the VCR Plus code in your TV listing, then punch it in. It's as simple as that. So if you've had it with your old VCR, get rid of it and get the first one with VCR Plus and cable box channel control built in. Buy select RCA entertainment products and we'll send you Nipper and Chipper.
Introducing the Volvo 850 Sports Wagon.
Yeah, I'll marry you.
Wonderful! I'm calling everybody in France. Only, I'm an AT&T. I pay the highest first minute and additional minute rates 7 a.m., 1 p.m. 1 p.m. to 6 p.m. is a little better. I have to wait until after 6 for the real discount.
Why wait? MCI has a new way you can call anytime. Now we give you low fixed rates 24 hours a day, plus the lowest priced international calls to any 2 numbers.
You know, since I've had all this time to think.
For the easiest way to save on international calls, join friends around the world anytime.
Listen.
See the future.
See it now.
Stay
Seiko.
A spark.
To have.
A flame.
To hold.
Seiko. Beauty in motion.
Advanced quartz precision. A vision.
Seiko. The future of time.
Some small people will take your family on a big adventure. The Borrowers begins Saturday on TNT.
It gets hectic around Thanksgiving. It's tougher to save time and money. That's why every lucky employee is working harder, doing what it takes to keep prices lower overall. It's why we've got such a great price on turkey for our customers, now just 29 cents a pound. And we're saving them time too with Three's a Crown. We're getting tougher to make your holiday easier.
Once again, live from Washington, Larry King.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome John F. Kennedy's press secretary, Pierre Salinger. Thank you, Pierre. What a harrowing tale Pierre has to tell. You were on a plane.
Yeah, I think, Larry, to explain it, I have to go back a couple of days. I left the White House on the 19th of November. The president was sending 6 members of his cabinet to Japan for an economic conference, and he'd asked me to join them to arrange a visit he was going to make to Japan in February of '64. He would have been the first president of the United States since World War II to visit Japan. We stopped in Honolulu for about 2.5 days and had a wide conference on the Vietnam situation, which was getting very critical. And then at 6 o'clock in the morning, on the 22nd of November, we took off from Honolulu for Tokyo. We were about 2.5 hours out of Honolulu. This is a presidential plane. I was sitting in the back, and suddenly...
Was it like Air Force 3 or something? Did they...
Yeah, Air Force 2. Anyway, somebody came and grabbed me and said, you have to go up in the front. And there's an office up there and a desk, and all the 6 cabinet members were sitting around the desk. And I walked in, and something was going on. And they handed me a dispatch from UP, and I looked at it, and it said that President Kennedy had been shot. And Dean Rusk said, go into the front of the plane and set up the communication with the White House. We're going to turn the plane around. I got the White House through the phone, and it was total confusion. I mean, it was just no way of knowing.
Didn't have a wrong code word?
And also, we didn't have our code names with us. And but it really was confusion too. We weren't getting anything that was saying, well, he was shot, but he's all right. And then suddenly, the code name came. I hear somebody saying to me, Wayside, stand by. That was my code name. And then every 30 seconds for about 5 minutes, Wayside, stand by. And then suddenly I hear...
Plane's still going to Japan?
No, we turned around.
Turned around.
In fact, our original plan was to go to Dallas. And then I hear the voice say, Wayside, Lancer is dead. Lancer was the code name of the president. And it was a shock. I mean, I walked in and told the cabinet members what had happened. There were tears. We headed for Honolulu. We had to stop there to get some more, to refuel the plane. And then we headed for Washington. The idea of flying 11 hours with this terrible thing in our brains and our feeling, I did something absolutely crazy. I started a poker game. It was a wild poker game, in which everybody was playing, but they were crying. And well, we flew, and we arrived in Washington around 1 o'clock in the morning. And I took a car immediately to the White House. And President Kennedy's body had just arrived there, and there was a religious ceremony in the East Room. And when the ceremony came to an end, Jackie Kennedy came up to me and said, Pierre, this must be a terrible day for you. Why don't you spend the night here in the White House? I'd never spent the night in the White House. Anyway, I went upstairs, and there was Larry O'Brien and Ken O'Donnell. We talked till about 5 o'clock in the morning, and then I went to sleep. And then at 7 o'clock, the phone next to my bed rings, and it's the operator. She says, Pierre, the president wants to speak to you. And suddenly I had this idea that I'd had a nightmare, some terrible nightmare. And then I hear this voice saying, Pierre, this is Lyndon Johnson. And there it was certain he was dead.
All right, now, during those 11 hours in playing poker, was there drinking too?
Not much drinking.
Was there funny stories? Was there exchanges of, sometimes in that closed confinement, things can get out of hand.
I don't think there was any humor at all. I mean, obviously
sometimes
people,
you let it out.
Yeah, I know. Shouting at each other about the cards and things like that. But also, I mean, there were meetings taking place at the same time. Dean Rusk had sent a message to the State Department saying to call all of our embassies and see if there was any slight possibility that they were getting any kind of information that this was a foreign operation to kill John Kennedy. So, I mean, people were focusing on the event, but this poker game just went on, and as a matter of fact, when it came to an end, I had $800 in my pocket, which in those days was a lot of money.
Didn't you feel also totally out of it on a plane?
Totally
out. Confined place? I
was totally out of it, and, well, I mean, from the moment that it happened, my life had changed. I mean, the idea that he'd been killed was just such a shock for me. And I have to tell you the truth that I wanted to leave the White House immediately. And President Johnson wouldn't let me. He said, you've got to stay. So I stayed. Not very long, but I stayed. But I have to also be honest with you and tell you that every day that I worked there, I drank a full bottle of scotch just to survive. Every day, every day, every day. And you know, in the first 4 days, and I'm sure my former press colleagues here will agree, you know, it was on live all the time, but my normal thing at the White House was to give a press conference twice a day. But then I had to give 2 press conferences in the morning, 2 in the afternoon. One was a press conference about what was going to happen on the funeral, and then, of course, what was going to happen with the new president. And that was
serving 2.
Yeah, I was serving 2 things at the same time.
During the funeral, where were you? I mean, were you in the walk across the bridge and up to the cemetery?
Yes, I was. I'd stayed in my office. I was working. Actually, I had the television on all the time. I saw Lee Harvey Oswald get killed. That was another shock at the time.
You were in the White House?
I was in the White House, and
Okay, now we've asked these others, you're drinking the scotch. We asked Ben, a very close friend, Jim and Hugh, who had to cover this. Of course, Harry knew him. Well, were you working or grieving?
I was doing both. I couldn't afford not to work. I mean, it was a job that I had to do to keep the information coming in as to what was going on as far as, I mean, there was enormous planning for the funeral. At the same time, we were in contact with a lot of foreign people who were coming to the events. We had to announce who they were. Charles de Gaulle was the first one who said he was going to come, and that was extremely important because he was a very important leader in France at that time. So all these things had to be kept in shape so that I could announce that to the press.
And at the same time, you're grieving.
And at the same time, grieving.
Let's get some more calls. Columbia, Maryland, hello.
Yes, good evening, Mr. King.
Hi.
I was in Cape Town, South Africa when it occurred, having dinner in a nightclub with some shipmates. I was in the Navy then. And when the manager came over and told us, I'm coming here to tell you that, knowing you're American, I want to let you know that we heard your president was shot. So we gathered around a radio and confirmed the fact that it had happened. The most moving portion of this whole story is the next morning when I reported to my ship, there were probably 24 ships in harbor as well, and every ship in the harbor waited until we raised our flag 2 block and then lowered at half-staff, at which time all the other ships in the harbor followed suit, and as I recall, saluted us with their ship's horns.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
What can one say to that? We all have our moments.
Well, I've heard some people calling in and also here about how abroad, as well as in America, people were shaken. I mean, I made a lot of trips after that. And for example, I went to Laos, and about 2 days after I arrived, a man had walked close to 100 miles from where he was just to tell me that he had understood that John Kennedy was killed, that he had remembered that, and he wanted to meet somebody who had been close to John Kennedy. And I was quite struck by that, that this man had walked 100 miles to tell me that. I remember going to Turkey one time on a ship, and we invited some people. We had our own ship. We were locked, and we asked some people to come on the ship with us. And suddenly this fellow said, I mean, are you, the Turk said, are you the fellow that used to work with John Kennedy? And then he went on in a long story of the terrible thing that happened to him at that particular time. So it was a worldwide event.
Chicago, hello.
Yes, Larry.
Yeah.
I go through this for the last 30 years, every year, and it's the same thing, and I really have trouble with it. I was driving a pop truck, a beverage truck at the time, and I'm on the southwest side, and my route was on the southeast side, which was all black. And I remember walking into the store, and this old lady ran the store, and she was kneeling in the middle of the floor, crying. Well, I ran up to her, and I said, April, what's wrong? And she kept saying, he's gone, he's gone. And I said, who's gone? You want me to call a doctor? And she said, no, they killed the president. He's gone. Well, a few customers had walked in, and there I was, 2 hours later, kneeling with these people, and we're praying. And I'm looking around and thinking to myself, I'm the only white fella here, and yet I felt the same pain that these people have been going through for so many years, and the outlook that they had in the future, and it was just taken away from them. Not just our whole country, but I mean, for those people that have suffered so much. And I just think about that every year, and it's just a great loss.
Harry?
And every year I go through the same thing.
Harry, comment?
I am just thoroughly convinced that until we really and truly understand what promise there was, you know, I think about it, everybody was deathly afraid of the Third World War, the nuclear holocaust. And at no time in our history had we come as close as we did with the Cuban Missile Crisis. And for whatever the reasons were, Kennedy confronted it, it settled, it pulled back, and a world heaved a sigh of relief. And from that moment on, I think everybody really felt that a Third World War would begin to become the most remote of possibilities. Somehow some sanity had all of a sudden entered the global perspective of thought. But whether it's a black woman, or whether it's a Native American, or whether it's a Peace Corps volunteer in Senegal, or some head of state, the Kennedy period and the Kennedy force had held enormous meaning for people.
Harris,
and without that,
one thing from Harry, because what you're saying is very, very interesting, but it should be extended somewhat. Because Kennedy did save us from nuclear war, but Kennedy and Khrushchev, after that crisis, also understood that there had to be a breakdown of the confrontation between the United States and the Soviet Union. And the dialogue that went on between the two countries in the period after the Cuban Missile Crisis could have changed the world if it had gone all the way.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, and unfortunately, he was assassinated, Khrushchev was thrown out of power. I mean, it's hard to predict things when a president has been killed as to how he's going to go ahead on something he's doing. But he was going ahead very effectively. Khrushchev was with him on it, and it could have been the end of the Cold War much earlier.
Paris, California, hello.
Hello, yes, I had just had my baby daughter that morning when we got the news of Kennedy's death. I think one reason why people can't get over it is they feel they've been lied to. They feel that all the truth has never come out completely. And that's why there is still such a deep grief, because they don't think that everything was told.
Your baby was born that day?
Yes.
Or your daughter is now 30 years old tomorrow?
30 years old tomorrow. Her name is Kathleen Mary. And
happy birthday to Kathleen. Ben, what do you make of that?
Well, I'm the wrong person to ask about that. I have studied it as much as I can. I've tracked down, I spent 30 subsequent years as a journalist looking at. I believe that Lee Harvey Oswald killed.
But do you believe she's right in that part of this pain is not knowing?
Evidently. I mean, I saw some recent poll that
90%?
90% think it's wrong, 60% think the CIA did it, was involved. I mean, it's just incredible.
Jim?
And it's this fear that people prey on.
It could be the reverse, though. The fact that so much promise and hope was taken away with the death of this man, that it's hard to believe that one lone crazy man with a rifle could have done this thing. And it in itself feeds this idea that it was a conspiracy in spite of what the facts show.
You know, another factor is that truth is always stranger than fiction. And in most novels, things are a little neater. And because there's still confusion about Lincoln's assassination, you know, and so we never will feel secure that we know all the truth about it. That confusion will remain. So.
We'll be back with more. We'll talk about the legacy after this.
What are you doing here, buddy?
You invited me to lunch.
I did? Honey! Cousin Dave's here for lunch.
He is? Oh, Ed.
Cousin Dave, we got a little problem here.
No lunch, huh? Well, we can go to Wendy's.
Yes!
Luckily, Wendy's has a 99-cent super value menu with delicious junior bacon cheeseburgers, chili, baked potatoes, and biggie fries. And for just $1.99, get our hamburger kids meal.
We ought to have lunch here all the time.
We do.
We do.
Wendy's, you don't pay more, you just get more.
Home for the holidays in your hometown. For 68 years, IGA supermarkets have been a part of hometown holidays, while the buying power of 4,000 IGA stores means hometown savings, like refreshing products from Coca-Cola and Pillsbury pie crusts perfect for holiday baking. Hometown holidays. At IGA, it's one more reason we're hometown proud.
IGA. A grapefruit drink that's actually sweet? Yeah, Ocean Spray Ruby Red Grapefruit Juice drink. It's got a sweet taste that's really different. If this is grapefruit juice, this is sweeter Ruby Red. Surprisingly sweet Ocean Spray Ruby Red.
Just a minute.
It's Thanksgiving again. Why not try something the whole family can feast on? MCI friends and family members can save up to 50% on daytime calls on Thanksgiving and lots of other holidays throughout the year.
Lasers, satellites, cellular data networks. What exactly have we launched here? UPS Total Track, the only tracking system that can confirm delivery of your air and designated ground packages coast to coast in seconds.
Your package was signed for at 9:26 this morning by Mr.
The arms race may be over, but the package race is just heating up.
Now, once again, Larry King.
The new frontier wasn't without fear and anxiety. America was one of the superpowers, dueling it out for world supremacy. JFK's passing was felt around the globe. Watch. Kennedy and Nikita Khrushchev had led the world to the brink of nuclear war, but also worked out a landmark ban on nuclear testing. On November 22nd, Sergei Khrushchev remembers there were tears in the Kremlin.
Father became very nervous because at that time his thought was that he really can deal with Kennedy and they can do better, especially in the questions of the disarmament.
The assassination proved JFK was more than an American leader. He belonged to the world.
He certainly captured Europe too, as well as the United States. I think around the world he had a terrific support. He provoked something that it's outside the kind of normal realm of the political thing. It was more to do with a kind of spiritual, and my God, he was lots of the other as well.
Today, in the world of freedom, the proudest boast is, Ich bin ein Berliner.
That absolutely stunned that crowd. And there were literally tens of thousands of people there who heard him say that. And the total atmosphere changed. Not just with respect to those people, but that changed German-American relationships. Bang, just like that. Well, Kennedy had that gift, and it's just a straight gift.
And on November 22nd,
Berlin erupted in agony that night. I had to go out and I had to take many taxis around town to go to various places where people were holding vigils. The tough Berlin cab drivers would turn and look at you and say, "Amerikanischer?" And you'd say, "Yeah," and they'd turn the meter off. They wouldn't charge you.
there was special agony for the Peace Corps, the president's worldwide troop of young Americans, volunteers, idealistic, out to change the world.
The fact that you're willing to do this for our country and in the largest sense, as the name suggests, for the cause of peace and understanding, I think should make all Americans proud and make them all appreciative.
They had done as he'd wanted and followed his lead, and now he was gone.
We took it so personally because this is the reason we were in Peace Corps. This is the reason we wanted to go and serve. And Kennedy had been shot, and that had been taken away. Although in some ways it made you feel even more strongly that you wanted to continue and do something through Peace Corps.
But for the so-called best and brightest, the ambitious young brain trust Kennedy had mustered to move the country forward, the assassination was a killing blow.
It was very, very hard for me, and I want to tell you that I was so struck by John Kennedy. I have to be honest, for at least 3 or 4 months, I could only survive by drinking an entire bottle of scotch every day, and I just couldn't make it.
Well, on the Harvard campus, of course, it was crushed because there were so many Harvard professors there. And more than that, so many of the hopes of the young professors had been attached to Kennedy.
So what was JFK's biggest accomplishment?
I think it was to renew the confidence of the American people in our country, in our destiny, in what we could do, to make everybody feel that the impossible was possible, that you could volunteer, just as an example, you could volunteer for the Peace Corps and go to Africa and change things. You could even change yourself.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
And somehow sitting here in the 90s, you know, once again, there's a feeling that, remember the things that we held valuable to be in the 60s? Well, they still are, and there's still hope. And despite the enormous impact of those deaths, I think that it was a very severe pruning of a very strong tree, and I think the tree is about to blossom again.
Is it you? Is the tree going to blossom again?
You have to hope always that it's about to blossom. And I don't think there's any reason now to think that it's going to be blighted. There's a reasonable hope that things are going to get better. Maybe it's because I'm an optimist.
Jim?
Well, I feel the same way. Optimism goes with journalism. You have to think that all these problems can be solved, or you couldn't ask questions about them.
Harry?
I have great hope. I'm not too sure how optimistic I am. I would like to be optimistic, but there is so much that beleagues our country, the world. I mean, I've traveled an awful lot. Chaos is everywhere. And some would suggest that in this global chaos, there's a greater truth that's being sought after. But the price we're paying, what's going on here in America, the plight of black people, unemployment, AIDS, dope, cocaine, indecisions, absence of decisiveness. Too many things are out there to make one cautious about optimism.
Ben?
Well, trees bloom. That's what trees are for. And of course it will bloom again, but it'll be a different tree.
Maybe a different fruit.
And it could be a different fruit, yeah.
Pierre?
Well, I think that we're living in a new world disorder, and I think we have to remember history. And one of the things that we've got to remember is how crises were solved back more than 30 years ago, by dialogue, by understanding. And I'm afraid we've gone through a lot of administrations who have forgotten that and have not dealt with that problem the same way.
What have you been, Ben?
Well, you know, one thing we haven't said here tonight is that the reason that the Kennedy assassination made such an impact on the world is that it was known instantaneously. Everybody knew it. And that is because of the developments in communications. I mean, think how long it took for the world to know that Lincoln had died. Think how long it took for even an assassination attempt of Roosevelt. It instantaneously, everybody knew it that night. Look at where everybody was, and you hear people who are in African jungles, and they knew it. And that means not only they knew it quickly, but it multiplied by 1 million the number of people who knew it.
Would he have been a great president, Jim?
Larry, I'm not smart enough to answer that question. I think I agree with Ben that he was on the come, and on personal terms, I think he might have been a great president. I can't go beyond that. I don't know.
You?
Yeah. I tend to think he would have, because there's always the potential for evolving into something better, and he was a learning individual.
Harry?
I believe that events would have made him a great president, because he had the ability to respond to events in a way that we landed on our feet. In his time, he had Martin Luther King. In his time, he had Khrushchev. In his time, he had a lot of people who were shaping history, and he fell in sync with them. He was pushed to many things that he achieved. I look at Clinton today, for instance, and I often said to myself, how sad it is that this potential is not being supported by the presence of a king, or men and women like existed in the 60s that made a big difference.
We're running out of time. Pierre, would he have been a great president?
Well, I was his spokesman, so I've got to be honest. I look at him as a president who made mistakes, a president who made big successes, but I believe that as he was moving forward, he was getting better and better and better. I believe he would have won a second term. If he had had 2 terms, America and the world would be different.
Thank you all very much. Hugh Downs, Jim Lehrer, Harry Belafonte, Ben Bradley, Pierre Salinger. Thanks to all who participated. To Carrie Stevenson, Tom Farmer, our producers, and everyone associated with TNT for these past 2 hours. A lot went into putting this together, and a lot of people were responsible for it. Thanks for joining us. Good night.